Hey everyone, my name's Dom. Welcome to Dominish Books, where today I'm going to talk you through my top 5 unfinished fantasy series. So do the usual stuff with the like and subscribe buttons, and then let's go and dive right in. So that's right, today we're going to kick off with the first ranking video on this channel. I've been meaning to put together a top 10 fantasy series list for the longest time, and I'm still not quite there yet. I'm still umming and ahhing over which titles are going to be in the top 10 and more importantly which order they're going to be in. So that one's going to be a little while in coming yet, just whilst I finalise it. What I am going to do today though is talk about my top 5 unfinished series. So my top 10 list will only include completed series and only where I have read all of the books within that series. So this little video today is going to cover some of the titles that are not eligible at this moment to be in the top 10 list because not all books in the series have yet been released. I've also cheated a little bit because I've included 6 series within my top 5 list because I couldn't quite decide which 5 to include or which one to exclude out of this top 6. So I'm just going to include all of them, and I do have an equal fifth, which did help me on the ordering just a little bit. So let's go find out what 2 series I've put in equal fifth place. Well, the first one of those is one of the long-term unfinished series. By this I mean we've been waiting for quite a long time now. We're talking 10 years since we last had a book published. This is The Gentleman Bastards by Scott Lynch, starting with book 1, The Lies of Locke Lamora. Now this one I really liked the storytelling. The Lies of Locke Lamora is actually one of my favourite individual books within a fantasy series. I loved the heist, I loved the capers that the guys got involved in, I loved some of the situations they found themselves in whilst undertaking those capers. It was altogether, for me, it was a fantastic debut. It was a really great introduction to a series, and I kind of fell in love with the world and the characters and the story when I was reading this book. So an absolutely fantastic opening to the series. It was then followed by Red Seas Under Red Skies and The Republic of Thieves, and for me both of those were a little bit of a step down from The Lies of Locke Lamora. So that was definitely a shame for me because I enjoyed this first book so much. For me, I felt that the best book was book 1, book 2 was the second best, book 3 was the third best, and that's not a great sequence to find yourself on as you're going through a series of books. So I'm hoping that we will one day see book 4, The Four Novemberlane, and that it's going to be a step up from those last 2 books, in my opinion, and a step closer to The Lies of Locke Lamora. Second title, the second series that I'm including in equal fifth on my list is by Brandon Sanderson, and it is The Stormlight Archive. Now this is one where a lot of people might be scratching their heads because typically when you're ranking fantasy series, people tend to put The Stormlight Archives right at the top in the number 1, 2, 3 slots. But for me, as I've said, it does not qualify for a top of fantasy list because it is an incomplete series, and I feel uncomfortable ranking a series, rating a series overall, including it in my top 10, my top 5 favourites lists, if it's not a finished series, because we do not know what's going to happen in that series. It can have all the hallmarks of being a favourite, but until it's finished, it can't solidify its place within those lists. So The Way of Kings is book 1 of the Stormlight Archive, and this is actually the only one that I've read. So why does this title find itself equal fifth in my list? Purely because I haven't read the next 3 books in the series. So it may well move up, and all the indications are that it will move up in the list, but until I get to them, I don't know. I did really enjoy The Way of Kings. I thought it was complex, it had some great storytelling, some great ideas in it. I loved the setting. It was a very unusual setting even for a fantasy novel, where you've got these vast plains and you've got all of these strange things that are happening, these strange beings, these shard blades and all this crazy armour, and there was just so much to take in. It's obvious that there's been a lot of work put into the Stormlight Archives. We all know from, even if we haven't read it, we all know how complex this series is because, well, pretty much everyone just keeps talking on about that. And that's a great thing for me in a fantasy series, and I really do want to get myself into the Stormlight Archive and catch up, ready for the next book coming out. When that is, I don't know because I've not checked. I think we've got at least a rough timescale for it, but I've got 3 more pretty beefy books to get my way through before I get to book 5 anyway, so I'm not too bothered by book 5 at this moment. I'm just focusing on Words of Radiance, which is one that I'm hoping I'll at least start by the end of the year. Okay, so 4th on the list, and this is a newcomer because we've only got one book that's been released so far in this series, and that is The Black Tongue by Christopher Buehlman, book 1 being The Black Tongue Thief. So this one I had a great time with. I read an advance review copy before the book came out, and I put the book on my wish list because I enjoyed that digital copy so much, and I just had to have this in my collection because it is a really great fantasy book in my opinion. The story and the characters and the magic were all really great, but the thing that set it apart on top of those items for me was the humour in this book. It just really struck a key with me. It's definitely my type of humour, and I had a great time with it. I know a lot of people who've read this book and who didn't really enjoy the humour that much, but if it does speak to you, then I think you're going to have a great time with this book, like I did. So this is another one where I'm not sure about book 2 in the series in terms of a title or a potential release date, but the ending of this book, The Black Tongue Thief, does give you a bit of a direction that the characters are going to be moving along, and I'm really excited to see where that takes them and what happens next. So I will definitely be picking up a copy of that as soon as I can when book 2 does come out. 3rd on the list, and it's a similar story to The Black Tongue Thief. This is book 1 in a series where we only have one book so far. This is The Bloodsworn by John Gwynne, opening with The Shadow of the Gods. So this is another one where I read a review copy around the same time actually as The Black Tongue Thief, and again I'd already actually pre-ordered this one because I knew that I was going to read it, as John Gwynne is one of my favourite authors, having written my favourite series, The Faithful and the Fallen. So there was no way that I wasn't going to read this one, and I was definitely going to get my hands on it as soon as I could, and I was fortunate to get my hands on a copy a little bit earlier by getting that review copy through NetGalley, so that was a great help. This one was a really great ride, and loads of people have said that this is John Gwynne's best work. I don't agree with them, purely because the type of reader I am, I like to grow into a series, and I do tend to find, although we've had an example on this list where the opposite is true, I do tend to find that I like the books more as we go through a series because we are increasing our knowledge of the world. The author is showing us more in terms of the characters, the world building, the plot is hopefully really ramping up and getting some real excitement in it. So for me, I do tend to like kind of the tail end of a series a bit more than the start of a series in general. Shadow of the Gods is a great example as well of an opening book where you've got so much setup, you've got a new world, you've got new characters, you've got new events, history, magic, and all of that to explain to the reader. So that's going to take away, for me, a little bit from the story because you've got to put all that focus somewhere else. So I'm not one of those people who thought this was better than all of John Gwynne's other books, but it is definitely up there as one of my favourite books. Certainly that I've read this year, even if it's not as good as the previous John Gwynne's. I am hopeful though that the rest of the Shadow of the Gods series, The Bloodsworn, will be right up there as Faithful and the Fallen and Of Blood and Bone was for me. I found Malice to be a really good book. I rated it 4 stars, and then the rest of the series were 5-star reads for me. Shadow of the Gods I gave 4 stars. So I'm really hoping that that pattern is going to continue with the Shadow of the Gods, and we're going to get book 2 and book 3 coming out at regular intervals. The series is going to increase in my estimation with each book that's released, and it's going to turn into an absolute favourite, potentially rivaling, when it's complete, The Faithful and the Fallen and Of Blood of Bone towards the top of my actual all-time fantasy list. So we'll see how that one goes, but Shadow of the Gods at the moment is number 3 on my list. Number 2 on my list, and this one might be my favourite all-time unfinished fantasy series. If I was to revisit this list at any point in the future, this one could well be at number 1, because I think this is the only list that this book will get on with the criteria I've set for my top list. Because I will admit, I'm not sure we will ever see the end of A Song of Ice and Fire. This is book 1 of Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. We've been waiting so long. This is another one that's been over 10 years now since the last book was released, And as I've said, I've kind of lost hope that we will actually see the end of this series. For this one, it's a little bit different to The Gentleman Bastards in that we've seen an adaptation that has gone from first episode to completion in the time that these books are being published. And for me, because we've had that season and all of the reaction, positive and negative, to the Game of Thrones TV show, I just don't think that we're going to get to the point of finishing the actual written series. That's my opinion. It may be unpopular, I don't know, but that's just how I personally feel about it. The series itself, though, I really love. This is so complex, there's so much to it, so many different characters and storylines and a whole vast world to explore, and I think that is done really, really well in here. Plenty of people talk about the description. I am really sorry about the reflection on the cover there, but this one, I don't have a problem with the level of detail it goes to. Loads of people talk about feasts and so forth, and all of the items of food and the clothing that's described and things like that. I like that. I like that it builds well, it's the world building essentially. I like that it builds the picture in my head, and I didn't find it too much. Or it may be that it was so long ago that I read these when they came out that I've just forgotten all of those unimportant parts. Either way, Song of Ice and Fire is right up there. It's one of my favourites. I do hope that we will see a written end to this series, but as I say, I'm not holding my breath for it. And then I'm not going to do any honourable mentions here because there's not actually a vast number of unfinished series that I've started myself that I feel worthy of inclusion on this list. So that's great because that means that there aren't too many series where I'm really chomping at the bit waiting for the author and the publisher to release the next book in the series. Moving past honourable mentions then to number 1 in the list, and if you've been watching the channel over the past couple of months, you can probably guess what this one's going to be. It's the one that I don't have a physical copy to hold up in front of you, but it is Threadlight by Zach Argyle. This one, I have spoken, as I've just indicated, I have spoken about this one quite a bit on the channel because I've read both of the books, Voice of War and Stones of Light, recently, so it's right up there. And part of the reason that it's at the top of the list, other than the elements that I'll get into in a minute, it's got that kind of proximity bias because A Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire I read so long ago now, and I've been waiting 10 years for the next book, whereas these two in the Threadlight series, I've read them recently, and I think it's next year hopefully that we should be getting book 3 to finish off this trilogy. The story itself in Threadlight I really enjoyed. The magic system was great, it was inventive, and it's a really exciting one for me to read. All of the different elements and the way that the magic works and the way it can be used to get characters out of different situations. I love that about a magic system, and this one was great without being too complicated like we have seen with some other magic systems. The one thing that really sets this one out for me is the writing itself, and particularly in the portrayal of characters. I really like the depth that Zach Argyle goes into when he's talking about the characters and their feelings, their interactions with each other, and certain things which have a real impact on their lives. So there's some really great writing to go along with an overall great concept and a great storyline. So this one, I've said before, is going to be almost certainly moving across from this list to my completed list, my top 10 fantasy series list, when I do get round to it. And hopefully by the time I do get round to it, book 3 will have come out and I'll have read it and I'll be able to confirm its place within that list as well. So there you go, short and sweet, but that is my favourite list, my top 5 unfinished fantasy series. Let me know in the comments down below if there's any of your unfinished fantasy series that you think might deserve a place on my list. There are a few others that I have started reading or finished reading what books have been published so far, but they've not made the list for various reasons. Maybe your favourites are amongst those, or maybe I've just not started reading them yet. That's all for today though, so thank you very much for joining me on this quick little journey. I hope to see you in another video soon, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.